Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. You said earlier in your oral testimony that about 50% of the federal workforce was actually showing up in the office during the pandemic. Do you know which agencies in particular actually showed up?
Congressman, thank you for that question. It's tied to those agencies that have occupations that require.
Okay, but like which ones? You tell me.
Well, DHS or DOD. I don't know all the agencies, but it's tied to the occupation that requires on-site presence. So it's oftentimes Border Patrol, other.
So if you're Border Patrol, Homeland, DOD over at the Pentagon, FBI, ATF, facilities, because you got to actually keep the stuff working. They had to come into work.
And there, of course, other occupations. I don't have the whole list of them.
So what is the difference between a worker at DOD or Homeland, or actually the better example, what is the difference between a federal employee with Border Patrol and a federal employee at Department of State?
Congressman, I don't quite understand your question.
What is the difference between a federal employee that is on our southern border with Border Patrol that shows up for work every day, mind you, under terrible immigration policies by Joe Biden, and an employee working at the Department of State? What is the difference between those two employees?
I don't mean to be disrespectful.
I guess, Director, let me simplify. Why is it okay for an employee at the Department of State to not show up when somebody who actually has to secure the southern border under Border Patrol has to show up? Why does the border agent have to show up every single day? And frankly, in some office buildings down on the southern border, which are extremely confined, but somebody over at the Department of State doesn't have to show up to do their job. Why the distinction?
Well, Congressman, I respectfully don't agree with that characterization. The Department of State employees aren't showing up. I've shared on our FEVS data that we have employees, at least for that particular survey, 60% of the respondents said they have significant in-person time, but they're showing up whether they telework or
hold on, we're claiming time. Can you define significant? What does significant mean? Is that 30 hours a week? Because I would define significant as at least 35 hours a week, maybe 40, but that's me. What do you guys define significant as?
I don't have the report in front of me, but it is specified in the report.
So you don't have, okay. So can you make sure you get us that? Because I think the definition of significant is an important criteria for us to understand. If we have half the federal workforce during the pandemic didn't go into the office. Let me ask you this question. Post-pandemic, I know what the president is doing about May 11th is the end of the pandemic. That's just because the president wants to send out $600 billion in American Rescue Plan money that should not actually be going out, by the way, because we're hitting the debt ceiling. We're $31 trillion in debt. So sending $600 billion out the door for the quote-unquote pandemic, which is already over, to me is budgetary foolishness, but that is what the president wants to do. That being said, now that the pandemic is over, what percentage of the federal workforce is actually back in the office?
Congressman, like I've shared before, that number is based on workplace arrangements within those agencies, and those agencies have to continually assess what.
Director, I got 1 minute and 10 seconds left. I'm going to sharpen the question. Do you know today what percentage of the federal workforce is actually back in the office place?
Congressman, I don't know that information. We do collect. We have a telework report report that we've issued at
Director,
the end of the year.
You are testifying in front of Oversight. You don't have the data in front of you about what percentage of the federal workforce is actually back in the office?
Congressman, it varies from agency to agency.
But Director, you're head of OPM. You're head of all personnel management. You should be knowing who's in and out of the office at a minimum on a month-to-month basis. This is data you should have from a month ago. Not even today. From a month ago, do you have the data?
Like I mentioned, Congressman, it's captured in this report. I don't have those details in front of me, and that report is public to look at. So, and the question.
But Director, you're here now. It being public is great, but we're talking now. Let me last questions. I got 10 seconds. Last questions. Do you think the federal employees should be back in the workforce at an 80% clip? Or actually, do you think they should be back in the workforce according to work protocols pre-COVID-19 pandemic? Yes or no?
Congressman, our workforce is back to work. They've been working.
According to
through the pandemic.
pre-COVID-19 protocols.
Protocols meaning?
I mean, Democrats opposed our bill in the Show Up Act. They opposed it. All we said was go back to pre-COVID-19 protocols. They said no. Do you think we should go back to pre-COVID-19 protocols, yes or no?
Congressman, it's a more complicated question than a yes or no answer.
That's not complicated at all. People got to show up for work. Thank you, Director.